Okay, so last episode we were finishing up this soybean field. Yeah, that's what we're doing. Nothing that much. This thing has the worst reverse speed ever. Finish up this one last strip of soybean. Oh shoot. This thing is so cool. I love harvesting in this game. It is the best harvesting I've ever seen in a game, though. Even though farming simulators don't come close. Man, just look at this field. It is big as hell. This is actually kind of equivalent to how big a field, or almost how big a field would be like in the real world. If this actually might be a little bit smaller. Yes. How in Illinois, if you don't know how it works, is that there's like basically Illinois looks like a grid, and there's boxes that are like a square mile, and there's a road on each side, and it's like stacked up and down, right? So there's like square mile segments of land, and that's how people farm in this game. You'd be surprised of how you know how in Illinois, most cities, it's not like, you know, farming in a lot of urban areas, and it not I mean like tons of urban, and then it's just like city. No, it's almost like farming and then city. Basically, that's what it is. Does wind turbines even spin? Almost done with this field. I can't find it. Oh yeah, it is. You can play like, I think like up to like 30 people. And actually, as of this brand new game, like, oh, I'm sorry, I usually play solo. Thanks for the help though. I'm trying to see as far as I can go solo. So actually, I have not gone as... I have not gotten as far as I have like in other games like this. Most of these soybeans will be sold to China. China, how much are they? Let's see. 60% of all soybean production in the world is sold to China. Oh my god, no, I didn't see. Oh! I'm sorry, but I just want to play solo, okay? I really thank you for wanting to play with me, though. I'm sorry, man. I'm mainly a solo player. If I usually play with, like, my cousin and stuff like that, but, yeah. Dude, Oh, no, 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 no. Not good. Not good. You know what? I can't risk it. I have to go get fuel. I start out with like 110 liters, And I just burnt 20 liters of diesel right there. I have to go get fuel. If I don't get fuel, I'm going to burn this combine out, and I don't want to do that. I'm into pushing my luck, but I'm not going to push it right now. I must go get fuel. This water leak killed 129 men. The Thresher? Oh man, that's a sucky story. A submarine goes past its test step limits and implodes, killing all men on board.
Safety standards for the US Navy's nuclear submarine training program are written in the blood of the submariners on Thresher. The sailors followed their standard operating
Who the hell puts a
procedures,
construction
a
drum?
cascade of failures plummeting to the depths of the Atlantic.
Thresher.
Thresher is the fastest and quietest submarine of its day, matching the smaller contemporary Skipjack class. It's created to find and destroy Soviet submarines. It has the most advanced weapon system, including launchers for the US Navy's newest anti-submarine missile, Subrock. It also has passive and active sonar that can detect vessels.
Tractors consume diesel, not gasoline. Which means that fueling them is a bit more expensive.
Extended range. It's the first of a new class of nuclear-powered submarines, combining the attributes of an attack submarine and a specialized hunter-killer craft. The submarine has a cigar-shaped hull for efficient underwater performance based on the research submarine Albacore AGSS 569. In its bow is the massive BQQ-2 sonar, which is the most advanced sonar ever fitted to a submarine. The Thresher's 4 torpedo tubes sit behind the sonar, 2 on each side, angled out at 10 degrees from the center line. They can fire the latest anti-ship and anti-submarine torpedoes, and at a later stage will be refitted to
I like how your kicker actually moves instead of being like
rockets. ASROC is a combination rocket and torpedo.
It just sits there and
Launched like a conventional torpedo, shoots to the surface, leaves
$1,400 in fuel.
Trajectory, plunges back into the water.
That's not that much considering I make like what, up to $300,000 per year in this game. That's my salary. I think my salary in this game and in the real world, bruh. Like, bruh. I mean, it's probably inflated in the game, but it probably costs a lot more too because there's like no rent or anything in this game. I appreciate how the tires are squishy.
The target site where the nuclear warhead detonates. The submarine's S-5W nuclear reactor plant gives it unlimited range. Its pressure hull, constructed of HY80 steel, enables it to dive to 400 meters. Following Navy
That's not
tradition,
deep,
the
though.
class of subs is originally named Thresher after the first boat. The contract to build Thresher is awarded to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard on the east coast of the US. Its keel is laid on the 28th of May 1958. It's launched on the 9th of July 1960 and is commissioned on the 3rd of August 1961 under Commander Dean Axie. Thresher conducts lengthy sea trials in the Western Atlantic and Caribbean seas throughout 1961 and 1962. These tests allow a thorough evaluation of its many new and complex technological features and weapons. It takes part in nuclear submarine exercise New Sub-X 3-61 off the northeastern coast of the United States from the 18th to the 24th of September 1961. On the 18th of October 61, Thresher and diesel-electric submarine Cabela head south on a 3-week test and training cruise to San Juan, Puerto Rico, arriving on the 2nd of November. The nuclear reactor is shut down while in port. No shore power connection is available in San Juan, so the ship's backup diesel generator is used to carry the electrical load while in port. After several hours, the backup generator breaks down and the electrical load is transferred to the ship's battery. Most of the battery power is needed to keep vital systems operating and to restart the reactor, so lighting and air conditioning are shut down. Without air conditioning, the temperature and humidity in the submarine rises to as high as 60 degrees Celsius after 10 hours, while the crew tries to repair the diesel.
Wow, that is hot.
It becomes clear that the generator won't
60
be
degrees Celsius? Okay. Let me put you into representation of what that is. At 0, water cools and melts into water, or it freezes into ice. 100 it boils. The hottest day I've ever recorded over 3 years of weather recording was 38 degrees Celsius. That's 60. That is hot. That is very, very hot. It's probably at least 150 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not wrong. I don't know. I don't know. I don't really use Fahrenheit anymore, but that is very hot.
before the battery runs down, so the crew tries to restart the reactor, but the battery charge is already too low. The captain returns to the ship from a shore function just after the battery goes dead. The crew borrows a cable from another ship in the harbour and connects to Cavella, which provides enough power to allow Thresher to jumpstart her reactor. Thresher conducts further trials and fires test torpedoes before returning to Portsmouth in port through the end of the year, and spends the first 2 months of 1962 with its sonar and sub-rock systems under evaluation. In March, it takes part in New Subex 2-62, which is an exercise to improve the tactical capabilities of nuclear submarines and anti-submarine warfare training with Task Group Alpha. Off Charleston, South Carolina, Thresher undertakes operations supporting the development of the Sub-Rock anti-submarine missile. It returns briefly to New England, then heads to Florida for more Sub-Rock tests. In Port Canaveral, a tugboat accidentally hits the sub, damaging one of its ballast tanks. After being repaired at Groton, Connecticut by the Electric Boat Company, Thresher heads south for more tests and trials off Key West, then returns north.
I can't drink whiskey. What? I'm literally like, I'm 18, I can't
It
drink.
enters Portsmouth Shipyard on the 16th of July 62 for a scheduled 6-month maintenance program. One of the systems they need to check over carefully is the ballast system, which has been repaired after being hit by the tug.
This series is
To
popular,
service the
actually.
system,
Yeah, keep doing
the
it.
engineers installed temporary strainers in the pipes to protect the valves. These strainers block contaminants from entering the pipework while the system is open. The work takes longer than expected, and nearly 9 months later, the ship is finally recertified and undocked on the 8th of
Man, what
April
a
1963.
clown show.
On Tuesday, the 9th of April at 0800, Thresher, under the command of Lieutenant Commander John Wesley Harvey, departs from Kittery, Maine. It meets up with the submarine rescue ship Skylark at 1100 to begin its initial post-overhaul dive trials. Together, they sail to an area about 100 nautical miles east of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. During its 2 years of service, it's already been to its test depth about 40 times.
How many? How many years of service?
Miles east of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. During its 2 years of service,
2 years.
it's
A really
already
new
been to
sub.
its test depth about 40 times. In the afternoon, Thresher conducts an initial trim dive test, surfaces, then performs a second dive to 200 meters deep, which is half its test depth, where it remains submerged overnight. The next day, Wednesday the 10th of April at 0630, Thresher re-establishes underwater communications with Skylark and sets about preparing for deep dive trials. At 0747, it starts to descend to the test depth of 400 meters. 5 minutes later, it levels off at 220 meters and contacts the surface while the crew inspect the ship for leaks. No leaks are found, and Thresher continues its dive. At 0825, it reaches 300 meters. Submarines typically rely on speed and deck angle, or their angle of attack, to ascend or descend. Much like a plane that alters the angle of its elevator to point the nose up or down, a submarine uses the angle of its diving planes and is propelled at an angle toward the surface or
I'm feeling
into
its
a
ballast
dive.
tank.
If the sub is going fast and the diving planes jam when it's already at its test depth, it could send the ship below that depth in a matter of seconds. So submarines normally move slowly and cautiously at depth. The boat is descending in slow circles and announces to Skylark that it's turning to Korpen 090, which means it will turn to a heading of 90 degrees on the compass. Transmission quality from Thresher starts to deteriorate as they pass through a thermocline. Water in the ocean is not always the same temperature. Sometimes you have one warm layer of water floating on top of a cold layer of water. A thermocline is the point where they meet. It's as distinct as putting your arm down through the thermocline and your hand being in cold water while your body is in warmer water. The change in temperature also changes the speed of the radio waves, and the turbulence between the two temperatures of water
I wouldn't be surprised that's
disrupts
actually
the signal.
thing.
Just after 9, Thresher is cruising at only a few knots. Right here, there are two diverging interpretations of the data. One relies on information from testing and failures on other submarines, while the other relies on sound recordings in the ocean on that day. They both arrive at the same conclusion, but take different paths to get there. Based on the information from testing and experience on other submarines, the official report finds that at 0909, a pipe joint ruptures in the engine room. This same type of joint has failed previously on other ships using the same type of connection.
Oh my god, fix it!
Silver brazing like soldering two copper pipes instead of a weld. Salt water from the reactor cooling pipe.
They soldered pipes instead of welding. If you don't know, soldering is a quicker way to connect metal. However, it's weaker, and typically you'd want to weld. Welding is basically taking take chemical and taking a wire, and then you make a metal fusion, and welds are pretty strong. Or soldering is much easier to do. All you gotta do is take a hot source and take solder and push the hot source as like a wire onto the hot, push the wire or solder onto the hot source, and it melts and it very quickly solidifies. I've actually soldered before. It's very, very key and integral to manufacturing electronics. So if you manufacture electronics, you have to solder. That's that gray stuff you see in the bottom of an electrical circuit board. That is soldering. It's basically like this lead stuff, which is why you really don't want to breathe it in.
Floods the engine room. The crew tries in vain to stop the leak while the engine room fills with a cloud of mist. On the other side of the engine room, water leaking from the broken pipe causes a short circuit in the electrics, and the water pump providing cold water to cool the nuclear reactor shuts down. USS Abraham Lincoln suffered pipes leaking from brazed pipe joints during trials, and USS Babel suffers silver brazed joint failure near test depth while on an exercise. The engine room in USS Babel floods with almost 18 tons of water in the 3 minutes it takes to surface under power and with blown ballast tanks. In another scenario based on acoustic recordings, SOSUS, or Sound Surveillance Systems, records 2 minutes of electrical instability, and the electrical bus powering the main cooling pump fails at 0911, causing the cooling pump to trip. In the recordings, there's no sound of flooding water or a burst pipe. At that depth, the seawater spraying into the submarine would be under a huge amount of pressure. That type of spray creates a very specific sound wave which isn't present in the recordings. This SOSUS data was classified during the initial court inquiry and was only declassified in 2013, so it wasn't entered into evidence or analyzed at the time of the incident in 1963. Come on.
Man, because if you're on a sinking sub, there's nothing you can do. You're screwed. You're stuck. That's scary to me, man. I'm not really scared or petrified about anything, but oh my god, I think I'd rather burn to death than die on a sinking sub. Because you can hear the cranking and all the metal twisting and bending under the pressure, and well, the only thing that's good about a sub is that when you do die in a sub, it's usually instant. I want you to imagine this, right? Water, like, it's getting crushed, right? So you're gonna get hit with many pieces of metal shrapnel, which will cause damage. The air will rush out of your lungs, basically collapsing them instantly before you can even blink. Water will come in and crush you because, okay, imagine you're gonna drill, right? Drill a hole at the top of like a water poke a hole in a metal, I don't know, a plastic bottle, and at the top, and look how hard the water rushes out, right? Barely anything. Now poke it at the bottom. It's going to rush out a little bit more. That's because as water is stacked upon water, you build, well, what we all know is water pressure. And water pressure is evil. It can basically destroy anything. It'll crush you to the size of a can in an instant at some places. So basically, along with you being literally crushed instantly, like, you are dying so many times over, and usually all this happens with a blink of an eye. You don't even have time for your brain to register it. It's instant death. Which is why...
The main ballast will fill the ballast tanks with air, creating positive points.
Oh yeah, ballast tanks, they act as bladders. Ballast tanks have air in them, and when they have air, the submarine floats. If they fill their ballast tanks, the submarine sinks. However, if I'm not wrong, the ballast tanks were filled with ice, and when they blew the ballast tank, the explosion caused water to rush into the ballast tanks and sink the Thresher, putting an end to her voyage, or as I say, putting her status as Eternal Patrol. A status given to submarines that have sunk forever.
While the ship normally uses only the diving planes to angle its direction to the surface, the additional positive buoyancy from the ballast will ensure a rapid ascent. High-pressure cylinders in Thresher hold compressed air. In order to replace water in the ballast tanks, the compressed air is released into the ballast tanks, forcing water out and replacing it with air. But when you open a valve like the ballast tank valve, air rapidly passes through the pipes. The air cools to the point that it causes condensation in the pipes to freeze. That's not normally a problem because as the high pressure air flows, it washes away any ice deposits. But now, the temporary strainers installed in the system to protect the moving parts of the valves during maintenance block the flow of air to the point that the pipes freeze over. These strainers should have been removed before sea trials. In just a few seconds, the moisture freezes, clogging the strainers and blocking the airflow, stopping the effort to blow ballast. Because the main cooling pump has shut down, the ship's nuclear reactor automatically shuts down to protect itself. When a nuclear reactor automatically shuts down in an emergency, it's called a scram.
Yep, scram. Shut down the reactor.
No ballast control. Commander Harvey orders propulsion
or AZ-5
battery-powered backup system. The engine room crew try to fix the pump and then turn their attention to restarting the reactor, which will take at least 7 minutes. The last time a nuclear submarine lost power in a controlled training environment, it took 20 minutes to restart. Jim Henry is a trainee reactor control officer on his first patrol, fresh from nuclear power school. He's standing in for Thresher's reactor control officer, Lieutenant Raymond McCool, standard operating procedures and gives the order to isolate the steam system after the reactor scram, even though Thresher's around its maximum depth. The nuclear reactor heats water which turns to steam,
which turns to turbine, and then that turbine is hooked up to a generator.
The pressure that creates is channeled through a turbine which converts that energy into propulsion and electricity.
And then the mechanical energy
steam is captured in a secondary
By the way,
chamber.
fun fact, I'm sorry, I'm a nerd. Yes, you can call me a nerd, people. When it says that they're generating electricity, they're not... crap. They are not generating electricity, they're converting it because of the law of conservation of energy. There is enough energy in this universe. Energy is not destroyed, and energy is not created. That's the first law of thermodynamics. I think I'm not wrong. The second rule is there will always be a loss of energy from a system. And guess what? Can you guess what that system, the energy loss is? Results in? Heat. That's right. When your computers are doing their thing, the energy is being lost because of heat. Heat is a waste energy. In fact, fun fact, the power from the station to your house will be lost by like 3 to 10% because of heat that goes along the cables and the power lines. Anyway, basically, they're taking nuclear energy, like nuclear energy or radiation, into fission energy into heat into to boil water, and then that water makes kinetic energy. The kinetic energy turns a turbine, and the turbine converts mechanical energy into kinetic. Well, not kinetic, but electrical.
As needed. Reactor plant operating procedures don't allow for a rapid reactor restart following a scram, nor the ability to use steam remaining in the secondary system to propel the submarine to the surface. The system must cool down and then be restarted. After a scram, standard operating procedure is to isolate the main steam system, cutting off the flow of steam to the turbines providing propulsion and electricity. After it's closed, the large steam system isolation valves can't be reopened quickly. These procedures are for normal operating conditions. They're not intended to restrict emergency actions involving the safety of the ship. Had he been there, perhaps an experienced officer like Lieutenant McCool would have kept the valves open and used the excess steam in the secondary system to propel the submarine to the surface. At 0912, Skylark pages Thresher using the signal K. K is the signal used to tell another vessel you wish to communicate with them. Skylark is not aware of the conditions on board Thresher. They repeat the signal K twice. At 0913, the transmission is garbled, but some words are clear. We're experiencing minor difficulty, have positive up angle, trying to blow. Officers on Skylark hear the hiss of compressed air in the background. Skylark acknowledges with a quick Roger out and waits for further updates from the submarine. They send a follow-up message, no contacts in area. This message is sent to reassure Thresher that it can surface fast because there's nothing in the area they could possibly collide with. At 0915, Skylark asks Thresher to confirm its position relative to Skylark, but there's no response. Skylark's captain, Lieutenant Commander Hecker, now asks a more direct question. Are you in control? A minute later, Skylark picks up a garbled transmission from Thresher, which is written in the ship's log as 900N. It might indicate the submarine's depth and course, or it might mean N as a negative answer to the question from Skylark, are you in control? A second transmission follows with the partially clear phrase, exceeding test depth.
That's
At 0918, Skylark detects a high-energy, low-frequency noise characteristic of an implosion. The estimated depth is 730 meters, almost double Thresher's test depth. The implosion takes 0.1 seconds, too fast for the human nervous system to perceive. Skylark continues to send messages to Thresher, repeatedly calling for a radio check, a smoke bomb, or some other sign of the boat's condition. At 11:04, almost 2 hours since their last contact, Skylark tries to transmit a message to ComSub Lance, the commander of submarines for the Atlantic Fleet. Can't communicate with Thresher since 0917. Have been calling every minute. Explosive signals every 10 minutes with no success. Last transmission received is garbled. Indicates Thresher is approaching test depth. Conducting expanding search. Radio problems mean that ComSub Lance doesn't receive and respond to this message until 12:45. Lieutenant Commander Hecker initiates Event Submiss loss of a submarine procedures at 11:21 and continues to repeatedly hail Thresher until 1700. At 18:30, the commander of the submarine force Atlantic sends word to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard to start notifying the crew's family members, starting with Commander Harvey's wife Irene, that Thresher is missing. Chief of Naval Operations Admiral George Anderson Jr. goes before the press corps at the Pentagon and announces that the submarine is lost with all hands. President John F. Kennedy orders all flags to be flown at half-staff from the 12th to the 15th of April in honor of the 129 lost submariners and shipyard personnel. From 1915 to 1963, the U.S. Navy lost 16 submarines.
16 subs?
Following this incident, the Navy implements a program called SubSafe, which is a more rigorous program of design review and safety inspections during construction. Since the implementation of SubSafe, only one submarine has been lost in similar circumstances. Air dryers are later retrofitted to the high-pressure air compressors in submarines to help eliminate ice buildup. Standard operating procedures are altered for fast recovery startup. This allows an immediate reactor restart and for steam from the secondary system to be used in limited quantities for several minutes following a scram. Having been lost at sea, pressure is not decommissioned by the US Navy and remains on eternal patrol.
Where is the... I should... I suppose I should took all my stuff. SL1? Ooh, the sodium reactor that melted down in America. I think a control rod shot out of this reactor and pinned the dude to the wall like an arrow. Which is one of the most brutal ways to go out I've ever seen. A control rod just like a spear. Whoops, oh, there we go. Back. There we go. And very smart system. Use hydraulics on the chain belts to basically.
What is absolutely clear is that the reactor's only 3 operators had died with no warning and no witnesses, and it was someone's fault. This is the true story of America's first nuclear meltdown.
SL1. Should be an experimental reactor.
The reactor and the buildings that housed it were located at the National Reactor Testing Station, approximately 40 miles west of Idaho Falls, Idaho. Part of the Army nuclear power program, SL1 was designed and prototyped on-site from 1957 to 1958 and became operational that December. Its goal was to prove that miniaturized nuclear reactors were viable for Army operations, able to provide electrical and heating power to remote locations like the Arctic. But SL1 was just one reactor in the U.S. military's ambitious plan to harness nuclear power in all its forms. In the August of 1958, a U.S. Navy reactor developed at the testing station became the beating heart of the world's first nuclear submarine, the USS Nautilus, which used the
Nautilus used to go to the first pole.
To dive underneath the North Pole, putting all of the world's militaries on high alert.
Basically, that is what my sub was. The Nautilus is the very first submarine to go to the North Pole and back successfully.
At the other end of the sprawling Idaho station, the U.S. Air Force was rerouting hundreds of millions of dollars towards a nuclear-powered jet aircraft that could stay aloft more or less forever. The tiny SL1 reactor, by contrast, the smallest in development, was not nearly as flashy and didn't get the attention or the funding that the promise of a nuclear jet or nuclear submarine commanded. What it did get on the night of January 3rd, 1961, was the maintenance efforts of 3 young men. Army specialists Richard
And my tractor, driving perfectly, not like a maniac like I am.
Richard,
I like that part of this game.
were above 30 years old. John Burns was just 22.
In a mobile version, you can send your tractor to the workshop, or you can send it to places like you can in this game, which is kind of like why was it in mobile of like 2014, but it wasn't in the actual game of, yeah, no.
They had gotten into drunken fistfights at prostitute parties, and Legg had problems with authority. He had been caught sleeping in his car while on. He kicked his feet up on instrument panels, and he would set off alarms intentionally just to startle his crewmates. A month before
This guy is
explosion,
such a tool.
Legg showed up to work drunk. In the January of 1961, it was Richard McKinley's 3rd week on the job, and he was still learning the ropes, uncomfortable with all the readings and instruments. These were the men tasked with restarting a cold nuclear reactor containing 14 kilograms of uranium-235 on a frigid.
Okay, so basically these guys are idiots apparently. They don't know how to run a reactor worth of crap. Why? Oh my god, America is such a weird country. We literally put a bunch of drunkards on a radioactive material, like radioactive reactor, and we expected something good to happen from that? Like, what? These guys are drunk. That guy should have been drunk. He literally, what's all? What they say? They're saying they kick their hand, like they put their feet up on the instrument panels, which is like, you could do that with anything, but a nuclear reactor, why?
Shut down for Christmas and New Year's, SL-1 was to be brought back to life by Burns, Legg, and McKinley on the third day of 1961. The most important part of this process was lifting the central control rod manually, just 4 inches.
Manually?
To the structural mechanism.
That's old.
Legg subordinate that night.
Nothing is done manually in reactors if that's anything
Rod with
wrong.
bare hands, while Legg stood with him at the top of the reactor. McKinley paced by. At 9:01 p.m., a reactor that was rated for 200 kilowatts of power generation spiked to 100,000 times that amount, 20 gigawatts, in just 4 milliseconds. The men didn't know it, but this minuscule moment, much faster than the blink of an eye,
Damn.
was the rest of their lives.
Hold on, repeat that again.
The reactor that was rated for 200 kilowatts of power
200
generation
kilowatts.
spiked to 100,000.
200 kilowatts. Let's see, so 200 kilowatts, or 200,000 watts, and it spiked up to 20 million watts. Oh, I'm sorry, no, 20 billion watts.
20 gigawatts in just
Damn.
milliseconds. The men didn't know it, but this minuscule moment.
Yeah,
much
you're done.
faster than the blink of an eye.
When you have a reactor jump up in that electrical generation that much, that's when you know stuff's about to go
Nuclear
bad.
Physics is hard, but how nuclear physics creates vast amounts of electricity is easy. Nuclear material naturally emits particles as it decays, which
Yeah.
can impact other material and impart a tiny amount of energy as heat.
Yeah.
If you put a bunch of nuclear material close together on
It makes a lot of
as
heat.
is the case in a nuclear reactor, radioactive decay will heat up other radioactive material, causing it to heat up and shoot out even more.
And chain reacts.
Now we have
So basically, why reactors can be dangerous is because when you put enough radioactive material, like, it has to be fissile, okay? For example, uranium-238 is not a fissile material, which is in Fiestaware bowls. You cannot put 2 Fiestaware bowls, expect them to go ape crap and all critical stuff. It has to be fissile or fertile. A fertile material will commence nuclear fission. Stuff like U-238 will not do nuclear fission. And basically, imagine like a grenade going off, right? And then like a bunch of grenades in a room, right? The fragment from the first grenade going off hits another grenade, and that goes off. And that grenade, the fragments from that keeps making other grenades go off. This is what atoms are doing. And if you do not control this, you will suffer consequences that are really, really bad. This will cause meltdowns if you do not control. Now, nuclear energy, the nuclear industry is relatively safe. I think more people die in coal mines and things like coal mines, people die from pollution, all that. And every year, there's more tons of coal ash deposited into our atmosphere than there are tons of nuclear waste ever generated. Waste, unlike ash, that can be recycled. No, I don't know. I don't know. It's kind of great practice to stream. I like just talking about science stuff. That way, if anybody is here, they can get it. They can listen. Yeah.
Plants that will undergo ancient mutation all by itself. What's
You really don't want this to run away with it, so.
materials that get in the way, absorbing those particles.
Like
By moving these so-called
control rods,
down
yeah.
in your reactor,
It
you
slows the
can
reaction.
control how much heat is produced.
It's like a brake on your car.
Use this heat to turn water into steam and steam into electricity.
Was it made out of boron?
Go really wrong at a
Or is it
nuclear
beryllium?
plant, control rods would probably be involved. The SL-1 nuclear reactor use water in two ways: as something to
Moderator.
turn into steam, and as a fluid to slow down the neutrons, the particles that
No, no, that's called
nuclear
moderator.
chain reactions flying out from the fuel rods. You see, not every neutron has the right energy to continue a chain reaction.
I think if
Faster
it's,
neutrons
they have
are
to.
actually worse than slower.
Yeah, they have to
neutrons.
slow the neutrons down.
And so water, a very dense fluid,
Slows them down.
acts as a so-called moderator to help continue the heat reduction by slowing down particles.
Damn, I'm
What's
on it.
more, the water in a reactor like SL1 can act like a failsafe. If too much heat is generated, water molecules move apart and expand into steam inside of the reactor. Now there are voids and less water to moderate. Too many fast neutrons are flying around.
Couldn't it make a positive void coefficient?
Increasing drastically. The reactor gets cooler and safer on the path towards shutdown. In the interest of simplicity and reducing
Basically,
size,
another thing is a reason why Chernobyl failed is graphite actually makes your reaction go faster. The control rods, the things that are supposed to slow down the reaction, had graphite that instead of slowing it down, actually sped it up. That's basically like saying, that's like when you go to brake your car, it accelerates for like a straight 5 seconds to full speed, and then it starts braking. Which, that is a stupid design choice, tipping your reactor rods in graphite. Again, that's like confusing the brake pedal and the acceleration pedal. That's awful. That's why Chernobyl failed. It's an awful design. Why are there only 5 control rods in this thing?
Shut the central rod number 9 all the way to the bottom of the reactor. Shut any reaction. And pull it all the way up, and it start the reactor all by itself. Make no mistake, building a prototype reactor like this was inherently safer than other larger reactors. Most of these larger reactors already designed a protocol that held that no single control rod should be this powerful, should be able to shut down or start a reactor all by itself, as it would take just one stop rod.
Just to screw everything up.
Situation.
Yeah.
As fate would have it, the control rods inside of SL1 had a habit of getting stuck.
Oh my god.
In February of 1959,
Yeah, there should be way more fuel control rods than that.
Yeah. Times. The central control rod had malfunctioned 7 times. In response, the Army told its operators to exercise the rods, regularly move them up and down to prevent them from sticking in the future. But the rods weren't the only problem. All the way up until 1961, corrosion inside SL1 was building up, bearings were wearing down, rods were getting misaligned. 15 days before the accident, 2 of the rods inside of SL1 had been hit with pipe wrenches.
No, it's
in order to
not.
get them loose. On the night of January 3rd, John Burns was leaning over a demonstrative control rod number 9, preparing to lift it just a few inches.
Oh my god, they're manually doing that?
Richard Legg was watching over his shoulder. Richard McKinley was standing just a few feet away. At least, this was where their corpses suggested they were. The difference between a nuclear reactor and a nuclear bomb can be as simple as the speed of neutrons. When a large nucleus gets cleaved in two during a fission event, there are 2 kinds of neutrons that fly out. The first are so-called prompt neutrons, which are the particles that are launched outwards in less than 100 trillionth of a second. The second kind of neutrons are the delayed neutrons, which are produced by fission products a few fractions of a second later. Nuclear reactors take advantage of delayed neutrons in order to control the energy released. Nuclear weapons, on the other hand, want to produce it, and it's a condition that would be an absolute disaster inside of a sealed reactor. Water and nuclear material would instantly vaporize, circumventing the natural failsafe of a water-moderated vessel, and create a situation closer to a nuclear bomb than to a source of electricity. At 7 p.m., John Burns got a phone call. It was his wife, Arlene, calling the SL1 facility to ask John for a divorce. According to Todd Tucker in his book on the subject,
Well,
Atomic
you're not gonna see him again.
Arlene's last conversation ended with a discussion of how to split his paycheck. John would hang up the phone, exhausted, having slept on a friend's couch the last 2 nights. And because of his frequent headbutting with the powers that be at the National Reactor Testing Station, he was now personally and professionally stuck with the unglamorous, somewhat reactor. This was all going on simultaneously in the mind of a man who at 9 p.m. that night finally reached the point in his long list of duties that involved moving the central control rod of SL-1. With his supervisor, Leg, literally breathing down his neck and his soon-to-be-over marriage surely clouding his mind, Burns hunched over the almost 100-pound rod, a rod that often got stuck, a rod that could start the reactor all by itself and properly, and prepared to move it just 4 inches upward and no further. Operators of SL-1 knew what would happen when he lost focus and pulled the central control rod up too far. According to Susan M. Stacy,
This guy slept on this person's couch, tired and stuff, and he's allowed to touch a reactor.
One responded, quote, "Of course, we often talked about what we would do if we were at a radar station and the Russians came. We'd yank it out." End quote. In other words, improperly removing the central control rod would immediately kill everyone in the building. Just 60 seconds later, at 9:01 p.m., this is exactly what happened. As the report completed years later would conclude, Burns withdrew the central control rod many inches too far, and just 4 milliseconds later, a power surge of 10 million% above normal
Done.
operation explosively vaporized the core of that cell phone.
And you're in the forever box. You're dead.
By this vaporized fuel and struck the top of the vessel with an extreme amount of momentum, enough to lift the entire 26,000-pound apparatus over 9 feet.
Yay! I'm committing dangerous
The plugs
activities.
at the top of the reactor were
I don't want to
forced
sell my
open by
soybeans
over
yet.
500 pounds per square inch of pressure, and the control rods were fired like missiles at the ceiling. The entire reactor room was instantly filled with burning steam, contaminated water, and fragments of the radioactive core. SL-1 had just gone through the product critical. Later experiments would show that the explosion that night was the equivalent of 32 kilograms of TNT, and all that energy was released directly into the bodies of Leg, McKinley, and Burns.
No.
There was no one else. No living being ever crossed this earth for every single meal of their life.
Doggo.
Long, short. This was the sequence of alarm bells that told the firefighters 8 miles away that something at the SL-1 site was wrong. Heat sensors had been tripped above the reactor, but the 6-person team on the way wasn't particularly good. They had already responded to not 1, but 2 false alarms at the site earlier that same day. So when they got to the building's unguarded gate at 9:10 p.m., they were expecting another non-incident. What they were not expecting was that the radiation detectors were blaring. 7 minutes later, at 9:17 p.m., a health physicist and a fireman donned masks and air tanks and approached the reactor from the stairs. Halfway up, the radiation detector started ticking, and ticking fast. They retreated down the stairs for an attack. Theirs must have been broken, they thought. There was no way radiation levels inside were that high.
It's a reactor,
They
idiot.
returned and found the same worrying readings, but this time they took a look into the reactor. The operators were nowhere to be found. With enough radiation around them to be dangerously dosing them in minutes, the men retreated.
25 runt
Emergency crews
R an
did
hour? Is that REM?
the building were nowhere to be found. With enough radiation around them to be dangerously dosing them in minutes, the men retreated.
Millie Runtgen.
Emergency crews didn't enter the building for over an hour. The radiation levels were high enough that a plan
No, that's Runtgen an hour.
It was decided that only one entry into the building was allowed per person, and that entry was limited to just 60 seconds. The first team of 5 men entered the building. They found 2 empty. Burns was dead. His body was gone. Both were soaking wet with radiated water. Both were removed by a stretcher and by the same ambulance.
What are those?
15 minutes later, however, McKinley was dead. 2 of SL-1's 3 operators were accounted for. The third was discovered last, because it was barely recognizable. Shaken men reported back at 11:30 a.m. News maps street side. They had seen something stuck to the ceiling, a lifeless clump they initially thought was a bundle of rags. It was the body of Richard Legg. Rod number 7 had been launched from the reactor vessel like a rocket and impaled him through his groin and shoulder to the top of the building. While the body of John Burns and Richard McKinley were easily removed, the body of Richard Legg posed a problem. It was pinned by control rod 7 directly above the now obliterated reactor core. Emergency crews were worried that Legg's body might fall back into the reactor core during retrieval, and if it was covered in enough radioactive material, or if control rod 7 still had enough fuel in it, it might cause the reactor to go critical a second time. So, while the bodies of Burns and McKinley were taken by ambulance to the nearby chemical processing plant, a makeshift hot room for the corpses on the night of January 3rd,
I'm not gonna sell my beans. Shall I? I want to sell it for the highest price.
On January 9th, a team of 10 men used sharp hooks on long poles to pull Legg's body free from the control rod piercing. It dropped onto this stretcher, attached to a crane hanging outside the building. The exposed vessel remains the only fatal reactor accident in United States history. At the time of the accident, there was maybe only a single man on Earth performing autopsy on a radioactive corpse. That man was Dr. Clarence Lushbaugh. Almost exactly 2 years before SRO exploded, Dr. Lushbaugh had put a man in a scissor from his brain in a mayonnaise jar and submitted countless tissues around the country after Kelly died in a cardiac accident that was now in a special laboratory. But that's a longer story for another time. Dr. Lushbaugh boarded a military DC-3 Los Alamos 2:30 p.m. on January 8, 1961, and arrived in Idaho 4 hours later. Reportedly, officials in Idaho were grateful for his work. When Lushbaugh and his team arrived, they found 3 bodies waiting outside of the decontamination room of Idaho Chemical Processing Plant, an improvised hot room after SLR exploded. The remains of Burns and McKinley were in stainless steel tanks filled with alcohol and ice from preparation, and Legg was still in the lead cask he was placed inside after he sank in the sea. His body was far too radioactive to be to process the bodies. Dr. Lushbaugh's team would have to get creative. Each body was heavily mutilated and so radioactive that it wouldn't be safe to be in the same room with them. According to the actual transcript of Lushbaugh's original autopsy report, quote, "Since bodies emanating such high levels of radioactivity had never been encountered previously, modifications of the usual autopsy procedures and techniques had to be improvised upon the basis of radiologic safety procedures and common sense. The personnel who made these examinations comprised a well-trained team of 5 physicists, 1 radiobiologist, 1 pathologist, and 2 physicians." And an improvised autopsy team was created from sawhorses and stainless steel tray. Knives, hooks, and hacksaws were attached onto lengths of galvanized steel pipes by nearby gunage. The team would be able to get in and remove the bodies with parts of them as radioactive as they were, so Lushbaugh cut them off. Quote, "Legg's head, which appeared to be the major source of the prohibitive radiation level, had been damaged by the blast beyond recognition. There could be seen some obvious circular fractures which appeared to make visible the separation of the head from the body. This operation was then carried out with a specially prepared knife, long-handled hook, and wire snare controlled through a 10-foot handle. The remains of the head were placed in a lead cave 20 feet from the cask."
Damn.
According to the 1968 book Atomic America by Todd Tucker, large chunks of Burns, Legg, and McKinley were, quote, "sliced, sawn, and backed off with washcloth, and then placed in a drum and buried in the Idaho desert as radioactive waste."
Damn.
Rushed by radiation.
It sucks when you have to be buried as radioactive waste.
Dr. Lushbaugh determined the cause of death for each man. Richard McKinley bled out after his hand and the right side of his face were blown off during the explosion. John Burns, quote, "died the instant he struck a flat surface that fractured his chest and drove a rib through his heart."
Oh my
And
god.
Richard Legg, quote, "died instantaneously from the destruction of his viscera by rapidly expanding gases that penetrated his abdominal cavity along with a heavy missile."
That sucks.
Examining the bodies, Lushbaugh was able to place them in the instant SL1 would prove critical. This answered the question of how, but not the question of why. Why did John Burns remove the rod like he did that night? Was it an accident, a suicide, or something else? Thankfully, most of the radiation released by the SL1 explosion was contained inside the building. This allowed the General Electric Corporation to remove the reactor vessel and clean the contaminated buildings from 1961 to 1962. On May 21st, 1961, GE constructed a burial ground 1,600 feet northeast of the original site of the reactor and sealed 99,000 cubic feet of contaminated material underground. The bodies of McKinley, Burns, and Legg were not returned to their families. They were instead placed in lead-lined caskets inside of metal vaults and covered with concrete.
That's sad.
So Bespoke Post, they just send you a cool box every month. The value of every box is at least $170, if not more. It's pretty good. Getting a month, they send you an email.
Richard McKinley, John Burns, and Richard Legg had died during America's first nuclear meltdown on a frigid night in rural Idaho. There were no witnesses. Based on the circumstantial evidence, it was either an accident, suicide, or murder. It's not surprising that the story of an unstable John Burns, just off the phone with his now ex-wife, who was possibly having an affair with Richard Legg, committing a murder-suicide with a prototype nuclear reactor, is the story that gets retold the most often. And you'd be hard-pressed to find any retelling of the story of SL1 that didn't include these details. However, according to the final report, which took almost 2 years to complete, along with literally hundreds of scientists, experts, and engineers from a dozen different research and government entities, no evidence of a love triangle or murder-suicide was ever found. The best explanation, as mock-ups and experiments testing every aspect of that night demonstrated, was that the central control rod number 9 was likely stuck, as it had been stuck many times before, and Burns pulled the rod up too far while attempting to free it. This wasn't anywhere near as exciting as a jilted lover bent on nuclear revenge, but it was no less damning for the military. The SL1 reactor was in a terrible state before it exploded. It was literally falling apart and looked after by young men whose total experience could be measured in months. As Todd Tucker asks in Atomic America, quote, "Why would a reactor be designed so perilously close to criticality? Why would procedures actually dictate the manual lifting of that rod? Why was Burns allowed to perform dangerous maintenance with so little supervision?"
Direct cause of the accident clearly appears to have been manual withdrawal of the central control rod plate by one or more of the crew members, considerably beyond the limits specified in maintenance procedure. However, there was
Feels like that guy's voice is everywhere.
That was the actual reason for such abnormal withdrawal.
The Army's hope for a miniaturized nuclear reactor had died with the men tasked with operating it. Rather than revolutionize power generation in remote areas, the meltdown of SL1 solidified a safety criterion for all future nuclear reactors built in the United States. No reactor after SL1 would be constructed in a geometry that would allow for just one stuck rod to force it into criticality. 2 decades later, the world would experience the worst nuclear disaster in history.
Chernobyl.
Chernobyl reactor number 4 would melt down and end up contaminating an area that was the size of the countries. This meltdown was far worse than anything that ever happened in Idaho, but interestingly, it was also a result of also during the maintenance of the shutdown reactor and also overseen by a small unsupervised crew in the middle of the night. When we don't learn from history, it tends to repeat itself.
True.
I'm sorry. Thank you so much, though.
I don't know how to say that. The
This is
Surface
an
Z.
holster right here is arguably the world's most comfortable holster. First thing you need to know about it, you don't
I,
need a belt
if I had to
buckle.
get a gun, I'd get a Glock 19.
Scrambling the soldiers out against the side of the
Boyonga? Boyonga? I think that's what it's called.
A treasure that looked like another man's trash. It was September 10th of that year when
That just
Elvis'
looks
friend
fishy.
Wagner Tejeda
I've heard about this,
descended
but
on the site
like
was
before many times.
and
This,
after
that.
looking in prime, they uncovered their treasure. What appeared to be a shiny metal capsule no larger than a thermos. Over the next few days, Alves was further able to disassemble the capsule, revealing something that looked even more valuable. He had been vomiting and feeling dizzy during this time, but he thought it was just something that he made.
Those are the symptoms of radiation poisoning. That is a radioactive capsule. Basically how they do it is they put a bunch of radioactive items within a capsule and it's open and closed when the radioactive beams need to be used. Basically, it's like a radiation gun because this is actually a way to treat cancer, is to shoot radiation at the tumor. Radiation destroys cells, right? However, cancer cells are immortal. They produce this one chemical that keeps cells alive, right? Basically, in short essence, there's like this certain amount of this stuff in your body produced, or in the cell produced, and once it runs out, the cell dies. Because if the cell doesn't die, there's going to be way too many cells. That's basically cancer. Cells produce this chemical over and over, and this makes them immortal. Now, the problem about that, cancer cells don't naturally die. So you have to kill them. And radiation is a way to kill cancer. Or it can be a way to cause it.
The owner of the scrapyard gave Elvis $25 for the shiny assembly and placed the pieces in his garage. One night, Tejeda noticed something wrong. The pieces in his garage were blown.
Yeah, that's not a good sign.
3 days later, family and friends invited the scene and soon Tejeda's employee Ernesto Falcano had cracked the canister of 1 millimeter thick glass water wide open. The true treasure was spilled out.
No.
It was 93 grams of sparkling crystalline powder, less material than the middle of a third of a soda can, that crumbled easily between the fingers. Fabiano took a large crystal to the in his wife, like caramel butter. He saw the powder to his brother, to his own. Tejeda's brother dipped a finger into the dust and drew a cross his out. Family and friends seemed to be amazing. Over the next week,
And they're touching this stuff. You idiot, you caused a radioactive contamination accident. In his defense, he didn't know it.
This is the true story.
Well, actually, you know what? I point the finger at the company that disposed of this stuff. In the normal mind of an individual, radioactive items aren't that common. They're only in like reactors and bombs, but radioactive items are way more common than you think. X-rays are radioactive. There's radon in your house that can build up. Even old Fiesta-ware dishes back to the 1930s were radioactive. Even uranium glass, some water from the 1920s like radium water, radium dials, thorium mantle lanterns, which are still not illegal yet for some reason. Yes. This is why you need to be careful. Now, the public, Geiger counters are expensive, right? My Geiger counter costs $300. The cheapest ones can cost as low as $200. And some people don't have this money. Hell, some people don't even know that Geiger counters are so readily available. This is why it should be up to the company to rightfully dispose of radioactive material, whereas the public should not be able to interact with it.
Koyomi is the capital and largest city in the Brazilian state of Goiás. It sits on the central Brazilian plateau, a region known for its cereal farms and cattle ranches. In 1971, a cancer treatment center opened in Koyomi, bought a radiotherapy machine, a device that focuses beams of energy emanating from highly radioactive source material into tumors. When the practice finally closed 14 years later, it didn't take the machine with it. It was abandoned, as was the building. Most of the clinic was subsequently demolished and left into the state.
That is stupid. They already left it there.
As the radioactive part of the lost, stolen, or otherwise unaccounted, and that made it extremely dangerous,
It is.
as the entire city would soon go down.
Unlike Fiestaware, which is slightly radioactive, this is intentionally radioactive as hell.
As the Fabiana was so low, but that of cesium-137, a common fission byproduct of the natural
Cesium-137 is one of the most dangerous radioactive materials you can actually lay your hands upon. It is actually it's actually what makes a bunch of Chernobyl dirty, is cesium-137. It is a very radioactive. What is the half-life of cesium-137? years and 70 days half-life. Compare that to uranium that has a half-life of up to millions of years. The most... Now that means it's going to decay quickly, which is more dangerous, but the threat will, you know, be gone. The the radioactivity threat from this device would be much lowered after a few hundred years, rather than probably a few hundred years. But like that's very hot compared to uranium and stuff like that. That is... Oh, God.
And unfortunately for oil,
I like radioactive materials. I will collect them. I will not lay my hands on cesium-137.
it is seriously radioactive, has a relatively long half-life, and disperses quickly and easily through the environment as one of its most regular chemical compounds.
9,999 liters of...
Widespread cesium contamination of both the Chernobyl and Fukushima Daiichi
Cesium-137.
is proof enough of cesium's deadly potential. Less than a quarter of a pound of cesium.
Also, it explodes in water. I don't know if the isotope does, but regular non-radioactive cesium explodes in water.
The social and curious nature of humans meant that it was more than enough to trigger the screening of more than 100,000 Brazilians in the fall of 1987. Not all of them would return home, and many wouldn't have homes to return to. In biology, there is a term called an evolutionary trend. This is where some evolved behavior can suddenly become maladaptive in a rapidly changing environment. Sea turtles, for example, who evolved over millions of years to hatch and then use the moon to find their way to the sea, can exhaust themselves and die in a modern world where many beaches and coastlines are lined with artificial lights much brighter than the moon and facing the wrong direction. Australian jewel beetles can take themselves out of the gene pool by mistakenly mating with similarly shaped and colored discarded beer bottles. The human penchant for the shiny and glossy made 93 grams of cesium-137 dangerously attractive in a single
93 grams. In about 30 years, that would be about 45. And then 60 years, that'd be about 22.5 grams of cesium, which is still dangerous. And after 90 years, there'd be about 11 point, like some, and there'd be like, and after 120, there'd be only 5 grams left of cesium-137. It takes that long for it to go away. 120 so years, it's still dangerous. Even a few grams is bad.
It is relevant to note, said in 1988 report by the International Atomic Energy Agency, that the interest aroused by the blue glow that emanated from the radioactive cesium chloride significantly affected the course of the accident. And, in other words, if the cesium did not have an almost supernatural glow, more people would have survived.
Yeah,
After
because
Ernesto
people love glowy
Fabiano opened
things.
the Pandora's box that the scrappers had put in, the curious powder was passed between no fewer than 22 Vienna families.
Oh my
For
god.
5 days.
Apparently one of the girls got it in, like the cesium in her mouth.
Devair's wife,
She was buried in a
Gabrielle,
lip casket.
covered her pajamas as sparkling dust
Ah.
sheets. Her mother came to visit her when she started vomiting, then returned home days later, bringing contamination with her. After Otis and Vea held the cleaning dust in his hands, he went back to work. He was a bus driver. He came into contact with dozens of them. Devair's brother, Ivo, brought back some crystals to his house too. His 6-year-old daughter, Leji, was infatuated. rubbed the crumbling glitter all over her arms and hands. She ate her lunch while admiring
This makes
how
me
her
so.
fingers
This gives me
sparkled.
so much anxiety as a nuclear
Within 10
enthusiast.
minutes, she was throwing up. Within 10 days of opening the cesium capsule, a significant number of people were vomiting, had diarrhea, and displayed skin lesions and burns. Local doctors with the symptoms of obscure tropical diseases.
No, I hope I can actually still harvest.
No one really knew what seemed to be killing Goyar's families. That was until Maria Gabriela, convinced that the glowing blue powder was the true culprit, got on a bus with an employee of her husband's junkyard and headed for a nearby public health.
Well, we're screwed.
An intense radiation burn would later reveal exactly which shoulder the bag was on. On September 28, 1987, Maria Gabriela, who had been dizzy and vomiting for days at this point, walked into the Vigilancia Sanitaria and placed the bag carrying the remains of the radiotherapy unit on a doctor's desk. This, she said firmly, this was killing her family. The doctor dismissed both Maria and the junkyard employee to a health center, and then later to a tropical diseases center where a number of those who had handled the glowing powder were now showing up. The doctor eventually got word enough about the mysterious bag Maria was carrying that he moved it to this chair in the courtyard of the health center. At the same time, another doctor on site was starting to suspect that the many skin lesions being reported were not from any tropical disease, but from radiation damage.
I'm going to take a break. Okay, it seems like in an hour, the stuff is just gonna, you know, the snow should go away. I may be back, and if I am back, probably briefly. You know, I'm gonna pause the broadcast. Sorry for the really low quality of. Sorry if that was loud. I usually unplug my chip because when I go to eat upstairs, it like says Bluetooth connected and it does all that stuff. Okay, I hate to do this. Mom Pearson might be like, oh, it's cheating, I guess. I don't care. I just want to harvest. I don't want to sit here for like 5 hours. No, 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 no. Oh yeah, that reduces the yield like really bad.
All of 1987. No matter what, eventually got word enough about the mysterious background he was carrying that he moved into this chair in the courtyard of the health center. At the same time, another doctor on site was starting to suspect that the many skin lesions being reported were not from any tropical disease, but from radiation damage. He contacted yet another doctor who was working at the Tropical Diseases Center, only to discover that he wasn't the first doctor who had called him about suspicious symptoms. It was decided to have a visiting medical physicist do so for at least another day. The next morning, the visiting physicist had borrowed a scintillometer from a local government agency, usually used for geology, and set out towards the Vigilancia Sanitaria. He decided to switch the meter on before he entered the building, and the meter immediately indicated the highest value it could measure.
Damn.
No matter what direction the physicist pointed the detector, the radiation levels were off the charts. Something must be wrong with the meter, he thought, so he returned to the local government agency to get a replacement. 2 hours later, he returned with a new meter, but again, the scintillometer displayed the highest amount of radioactivity.
That's just scary.
Simultaneously, the doctor who saw Maria Gabriela had called the fire alarm. The physicist, now convinced that there was a major source of radiation inside the health center, had to persuade the firefighters not to go near the source. And that's because they were planning on picking up the bag and throwing it into the nearest river. The rest of
You are stupid! Throwing that would make it way worse. Right, like right there. If on a containment value, it is way more contained on that chair than throwing it in a river. I'd rather bury it. Throwing it in a river is just gonna spread it more. My
30
God.
minutes later, the police and fire brigades helped evacuate everyone.
No critical thinking in
An
that.
hour after that, doctors had to
The only
send out
criticality is within that radioactive stuff, not your
They
brain,
found
isn't it?
insane off-the-charts readings. Bahena and his family, who had to be convinced, were evacuated. Over the next few hours, government agencies were contacted, the Secretary for Health was informed, and the National Nuclear Energy Commission was brought up to speed. By nightfall, the the Secretary for Health had made the city's Olympic Stadium a staging ground for receiving potentially contaminated persons, and the Tropical Diseases Hospital, the first to see many of the suspicious symptoms, was informed that their patients were in fact irradiated. Known sites of contamination were resurveyed, and the Civil Defense Force was put on alert. The Estadio Olímpico Pedro Ludovico has a capacity of 13,500 people. Beginning on September 30th, the National Nuclear Energy Commission would monitor over 112,000 people there on the field. Those most affected by the radiation were placed in tents, and more people throughout the city were showing up after hearing rumors. Many tried to go to the Olympic Stadium simply for insurance. Although no local plans for responding to radiological emergencies on this scale had existed, including the 1988 report by the International Atomic Energy Agency, the authorities' improvised strategy worked effectively in bringing the situation under control and preventing further serious exposure. Contaminated persons were directed to take showers and place their clothes in bags. This reduced the ticking of radiation meters by between 50 and 80%, and monitoring equipment was set up to screen the hundreds lining up outside the stadium. Unfortunately, decontamination was only partially successful, as the most affected victims were constantly sweating out the cesium-137 that had accumulated inside of their bodies. In the early morning hours of September 30th, authorities returned to the Vigilancia Sanitaria to contain the remainder of the source first brought in by bus by Maria Gabriela. A small crane was used to lower a section of sewer pipe over the chair where the bag still sat, and then concrete was pumped in over the wall to seal the chair inside the pipe forever. Radiation rates dropped dramatically. Of the 112,000 people monitored for cesium-137 exposure in Colonia, 1,000 had received the equivalent of an entire year's worth of normal background radiation in just a few days. 249 people were seriously contaminated, either externally or internally, through direct contact with the cesium dust, and of those people, 20 displayed acute radiation sickness, needing immediate hospital treatment. These patients were transported to hospitals across Brazil. But at Goiânia General Hospital, the patients were left uncared for 2 days, as no one on site had the training to deal with the radiation. 19 of the 20 most contaminated had some sort of serious skin injury: swelling, bronzing, blistering, loss of skin entirely. Ernesto Fabiano, who took a rice grain-sized chunk of cesium to make a ring for his wife, ended up putting that piece in his pocket against his thigh. The radiation ate all the way into his largest muscles.
Oh,
The bus driver, Odissan Ferreira, lost most of the skin on his hand where he handled the powder, and would end up losing the tips of some fingers. The rupture of a medical device in Goiânia resulted in the worst case of cesium-137 contamination in medical history, a history that includes both Fukushima Daiichi and Chernobyl. And sadly, not all of the tragically curious 20 would survive. The goal of this documentary is not to exploit the trauma or the injuries of the people of Goiânia. Rather, it is to show how the unimaginable potential of nuclear reactions can lead to disaster when not properly respected, managed, and communicated. This can be no clearer than after Leite Ferreira died, the 6-year-old who thought she was playing with fairy dust. After Leite succumbed to acute radiation poisoning, her body was transferred to be buried in a cemetery back in Goiânia. The news of her impending burial caused a riot of nearly 2,000 people. They believed that her body would poison the land. They used stones and bricks to block the car carrying her body, but she was still successfully buried in a special fiberglass coffin, lined with lead. The military also had to hold back protesters during the burial of Israel Batista dos Santos, one of the scrapyard employees who dismantled the cesium capsule with its lead. Adilson Alves de Souza, aged 18, worked with Dos Santos and also died. Maria Gabriela, aunt of Leite and wife of Debair, died on the same day as her niece, 1 month after exposure. The Goiânia incident would end up costing lives. The contamination of an entire city and an economic catastrophe all from less material than would fill half of a tennis ball. If there is anything at all good to say about the Goiânia incident, it's that the situation was brought under control by swiftly acting public and private personnel extremely quickly. Within 3 days of discovering that it was the glowing blue powder that was burning through unfortunate families, all sources of exposure were identified and contained. By the following Saturday, the main concerns were patient treatment and the cleanup of contaminated sites. A helicopter was brought in to survey more than 67 square kilometers. Detectors mounted inside of cars checked on and around more than 2,000 kilometers of roads. 85 houses were significantly contaminated. 42 of them were decontaminated with vacuums and pressure washers. The rest, along with several city blocks, were demolished. 3 buses, 14 cars, and 50,000 rolls of toilet paper were also now radioactive. In total, 3,500 cubic meters of waste was seeped away, around 1.5 Olympic swimming pools of cesium poison material. By Christmas, all the main sites of contamination were dealt with, and work continued with the hopes of returning the area to normal for the next 3 months. But while dust can be buried and homes can be rebuilt, the people of Goiânia lived with the lingering effects of just a handful of glowing powder for the rest of their lives. The Ferreira family lost everything. Their homes had to be destroyed. Irradiated pets had to be put down.
That
Old
sucks.
family histories packed into drums of nuclear waste and buried. The junkyard owner, Defair, pictured here, died 7 years after his wife Maria Gabriela Leger, reportedly due to a plunging depression and years of heavy drinking. Wagner Ferreira, one of the 2 original
Poor man
thieves
didn't
of the
deserve
Fourth
it.
Source, would be scarred for life. The bus driver, Odysseus Ferreira, was marked in a similar way, losing parts of his fingers and the skin on his hands. And the damage done in Goiânia wasn't all physical. After the incident, Odysseus recalls being ostracized by his community. His neighbors, as they did with Leger's burial, tried to block his family from moving into certain neighborhoods. He ended up getting a vasectomy because he was now too afraid to have any more children. I still have pain in my hands.
You know what? In his defense, that stupid company knew that that was radioactive. Like, let's go. I don't mean this in a harsh way, but a lot of people in Brazil and these countries don't know a lot about radiation. They didn't know the harms of it, and a lot of people, even in America, all they know the harms. They don't know what's radioactive. Like, you could take you could take anyone from, you know, quote unquote, the least intelligent person from a third world country to the most intelligent person in a first world country. Take any person from that category, most of them would not know that what they're dealing with was radioactive. What I'm trying to say here is that citizens lack awareness of radioactive material. Even, you know, even where the United States, where people are trained that radiation is bad, stuff happens. Knew of the dangers, and they failed to dispose of it correctly.
Sometimes my hands are so hot that I have to put them in the freezer. Today, Odysseus is the president of the Association of Cesium Victims of Goiânia, which has more than 1,600 members seeking continued compensation and medical treatment. In 2017, he received an honorary Lifetime Achievement Award from the Iranian Film Festival for his many decades of advocacy. The original radiotherapy course, taken by the military back in 1987, is now on display at the School of Specialized Instruction in Rio de Janeiro, and is much less family attractive. The accident in Goiânia, the 1988 report by the International Atomic Energy Agency includes, shows how actions that would have been innocuous under ordinary circumstances became matters of life and death. If humans weren't such social creatures, if we didn't like to touch, to share, if cesium-137 weren't so radioactive, enough to ionize the air around it, this disaster might have been avoided entirely. Instead, a curious consequence of our quest to fully harness the near limitless potential of the nuclear lives on to scar the minds, hearts, and hands of the people of Goiânia. After the cancer treatment clinic was abandoned in 1985, one of its owners tried to return and recover some of the objects left behind, including the radiotherapy machine. A court-appointed police force stopped him, as the owners of the land the clinic was built on disputed the final state of the building. Now deterred, the man warned that they would be responsible, quote, for what would happen with the cesium bomb. And all this happened 4 months before the incident. And records now show that the state court of Goiás, Brazil knew that there was radioactive material inside the abandoned building for more than a year before 2 young men looking for scrap metal accidentally started the worst radiological disaster in Latin America's history. Until next time. Thank you so much to the very nerdy staff at the facility for their direct and substantial support in the creation of this here video. Today's special...
That sucks because it's like... Alright, hello. That's one of the... I'm not really that radiophobic as a person. I don't really fear radiation a whole lot more like other people. But the thing that's scary about it to me is that seemingly innocent objects like can be just radioactive as hell. Like radiation, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, you can't see it, you can't feel it. Well, you could feel it, maybe even taste it, but by the time you do taste it, which I've heard plutonium has this sweet metallic taste, which is creepy to me. One of the most toxic metal has a sweet taste to it. By the time you even sense it, it's already too late. And you're going to have a bad day. Like, seemingly innocent Fiesta-ware pieces from antique shops are radioactive. Thorium mantles from lanterns. Even uranium... Oh yeah, I am farming. I am farming soybeans. I have to go here in a second. I gotta go to college. Go to math class. Yeah. It's farming time in my state right now. I live in Illinois, and everybody is starting to go out. Yeah. Everybody's now going out, and they're harvesting their crops. Cops trying to come snatch my crops. Yes, I had to say that, but anyway. These exact combines are everywhere where I live. I'm gonna try a new way of harvesting. I'm gonna rotate 90 degrees. I'm sorry, I have to go, man. I might be on later tonight. Trust me, if I wanted to stay longer, I would. I have to be there by 12, and it takes a 30-minute drive, and it's 11:24. So yeah, I'm gonna go. You know, how I go like this? I'm gonna go like this, the long ways. Yeah, guys, I hate to say it, but sorry, we have to go. I might be back later, late tonight. Yeah, I'll try to get back. If I didn't have to go, I wouldn't be going right now, but I have to dip. Sorry, guys. Maybe check back within like 5-6 hours.